Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Do Well podcast. My name is Craig Bass.
I'm Jalen,
and we are so excited to have all of you with us. Thank you for tuning in.
Yes.
And we also have a special guest. But before we introduce our special guest, Jalen's going to drop some info for y'all.
All right. Once again, thank y'all for joining back in with us. You can always find us on social media. You can find us on Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, Anchor, and now we're on Apple Music.
Hey, we on Apple Music.
Yes, we appreciate y'all. We see the streams going up on Apple Music. It popped up. But yeah, you can find us there under Do Well Podcast. If you're trying to find on Spotify, put Do Well Podcast, Craig and Jalen. Make it a little easier. Thank y'all again for the support. Thank y'all.
We famous.
How y'all roll?
Yeah, right.
All right, guys. Without further ado, I am so excited to introduce my friend, my brother, Gabriel Greaves, on our conversation about justice, racial reconciliation, and the current movement that we are seeing in our country and in the world. All right, let me just share a little bit about Gabe. Gabe is an historian, evangelist. He works deeply in the community, doing outreach and evangelism, has been doing it for over 14 years. He is a fellow Georgia boy, KSU graduate, that is Kennesaw State University. He has a Master's of American Studies with a background in Afro-Latino studies. Gabe is also a research assistant with the National Council of Elders. He's grown up in a multi-ethnic, multi-generational home, so he loves educating through oral histories and showing the complexities of racial identities in our society. He co-leads Bridges versus Barriers, using movement journalism and historical activism to build Christ-centered reconciliation movements. So, guys, please welcome Gabe. Gabe, what's going on, bro?
What's going on, fam? Good to be with you guys finally and stuff. And so honored that you made this possible. I just want to say that before anything else, that I'm so honored by the work you guys have been doing for some time and putting the voices out there in the masses for people to hear amongst your own and voices that are speaking relevant issues for the times that we live in. So just thank you guys just for being an inspiration to me and so many others. And yeah, I've been really just excited to see the kind of conversations you guys are talking about. It's been really dope. So, and yes, this is funny. So I have to say sometimes it's surreal when you realize that you've gone from talking about things to actually having them. Now I'm sitting here in my house with my roommate, quiet Greaves. Quiet.
Hey, for the folks who are tuning in via podcast without the video, it's a bird. He has a bird on his shoulder right now.
Green cheek conures. Yellow-sided green cheek conures. Yeah. And animals are a really big deal for me. I love biodiversity. I actually grew up my mother got me a book. I forget the name of it, but it was like this encyclopedia of animals.
Wow.
Wow.
So it was this massive book, I can't even show it to the computer screen, so I'm not going to try, but it's a massive book that showed, every kind of biome in the world, tundra, as we know, is different than the savanna. Savanna is different than the rainforest, but it showed different kinds of biomes across the planet, and it showed every animal that was present in that biome, and it showed within their species, and the families they came from, the different types. So you saw different types of waterfowl, you saw different types of ducks, you saw different types of flamingos, different types of penguins, different types of big cats. It was just interesting, and I learned that at an early age. My middle name is Adam, of course. And so, I loved seeing in the Bible people like Adam naming on the animals. And then Noah, when the world was going to kaput, Noah was asked to save himself, his family, and a whole bunch of animals, a whole bunch of biodiversity for mankind to survive. And so that's a big part of what I do as well with bringing awareness to voices that deal with creation care and sustainable development for me, as I found out doing some history research and realizing that I'm actually related to someone who is the godchild of George Washington Carver.
Wow.
And George Washington Carver is a man of God, but he was also a man who was very aware of his own gift with nature, with speaking the plants and using the botanical world to bring healing. He was a part of healing revivals in his church. And there are a couple of books I can reference later on that I would definitely encourage people to check out as it concerns George Washington Carver's faith, because he wasn't just someone who revolutionized the entire Southern economy when it came to crop rotation. He literally is responsible for many of the food items that you shop for all the time. An item that's used in your car door, was made from soy, which George Washington Carver came up from. He actually was going to make a deal with Henry Ford at one point to create an alternative form of gas, an automobile. And he was a man of God again. He was a man
exactly.
of God.
Wow.
And that's why I love talking with Gabe.
That's fire.
Because every time I get off the phone with him or out of his presence, I'm just like, dang, I just learned something new. Like,
right.
Like, I ain't know nothing about that. But
that's good, yo.
It was funny, man. It's interesting because I didn't grow up knowing all that stuff about George Washington Carver, and living in the South. We were told at one point he was a peanut man who made multiple food items from 300 food items from peanuts, but that's not all he did. And when you look at what his works were about, how he did critical work at Tuskegee, with Booker T. Washington, in a time where people were doing resistance movements and protesting against systems like Jim Crow and black codes and convict leasing. George Washington Carver was not trying to be anything other than the brilliant man of God he was. And he transformed the world in a very strategic way while being who he was, faithful to his design, with taking care of the natural world, where people were saying, what are you doing, George Washington? Don't you know that the world is going down? Don't you know that racism is a problem? He wasn't ignorant of it because he came from a family that had been enslaved in Missouri. In Arkansas, to my knowledge.
Wow.
He had come from that background. He knew what it was like, when the Mason-Dixie line allowed for states out in the Midwest to still own slaves and do trafficking. He knew what that was like, to be kidnapped. And thankfully, because he was adopted later on, he knew what it was like to have his life transformed and to do art. And from there to see art in the natural world. And when he was strategically positioned to help prevent ecological devastation that would have caused millions to starve, he was in his position. And so I tell people, no matter what's going on in the world, you need to know what your own position is meant to be, because we need to be strategic about how we're going about this.
That's
Some
powerful.
are meant to be front lines. Others are meant to be keeping us alive, because I don't care how much activism you do. If there's a dust bowl and the food supply goes down, we all going to starve.
Yeah.
Wow.
So if you have a heart to feed people, I need you to be feeding people.
Wow. That's good.
Wow. I love that, Gabe, because that's empowering. That empowers people and lets them know that there are many ways that you can do this work. There's many ways to resist. You don't have to be on the front lines marching. Yes, you can be there, but you are created by God with a specific purpose. And that's the point.
Yeah. Always has been.
Yeah.
And by the way, the book that I will reference to you guys is George Washington Carver. Please tell me I got that. George Washington Carver, his life and his faith in his own words.
Wow. So Gabe, going off of what you just said, okay, yeah, we'll have to add that to the bio.
Oh yeah.
So Gabe, just talking about how we all have a call. We all are called to justice according to the word of God, that we're called to seek justice in the land. And we all have our specific way and makeup of how we do that. So tell us more about who you are and how you're called to do this work?
Well, for me, let me see if I can break that question down in chunks, because my story is quite nuanced. Let me go ahead and share some just biographical aspects of, my DNA. I'm a proud, like anyone who knows me knows I am proudly Black. I am pro-Black, not anti-white. I love my whiteness too, and here's why I say that. But before I go any further, please keep in mind, if you know me, you'll know that genealogy is a really big deal for me. It's a big deal for many in the African American community, and the reason why is because knowing your roots is also a huge part of resisting cultural genocide and assimilation. And so for people that had their families separated by force due to the forced enslavement and kidnapping of children and selling of mothers and fathers away from each other, because of family units being broken apart and family being a really big deal within the African context that many of us descended from, it's really important for people to get the names of your ancestors, to know what stories are being passed down in your line. I look at the Bible and I look at the genealogy of Christ. If it wasn't important, it would have been mentioned in Matthew chapter 1. It would have been mentioned in Luke chapter 3 when it came to the very lines that Jesus came from. And all the people that were listening, good and bad,
Exactly. 42 generations.
42 generations.
42,
this was something that happened for every Hebrew family in the scriptures. In the book of Ezra, you had to know where you came from in order to get access to the land, because it was critical for the right people to be present. The book of Numbers, you saw the same thing when it came to every tribe numbering itself, and also having prominent leaders in the tribes that did amazing works. People miss those details, but for me, I have a heart for those details because of my background. So to your point, let me share a little bit about myself. I was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. My mother was a single mother at the time. She was actually born and raised in Panama, along with my grandparents and my great-grandparents. Her background, she grew up in Panama, and was a dynamic woman of God. She was actually a missionary to Costa Rica and other spaces. But she lived in Panama. Her father was born in Panama as well. His roots were from Barbados. And as I found out recently, more specifically, they also had roots in the Philippines. On her mother's side, the maternal side, her mother was born and raised, of course, in Panama. I believe Colon. But her mother's father, my mother's grandfather, was born in Barbados. Now he's Scottish on his father's side, English, and it's also on his mother's side, Middle Eastern, Sephardic. And when he was 5 years old, his mother took him and his 3 siblings to the Panama Canal, and he ended up growing up on the canal zone. He later on became the chief of motor transportation and got all the veterans in the canal zone to their destination. So my great-grandfather is pretty well known in Panama. My great-grandfather was white, also West Indian Hispanic, but a white West Indian Hispanic, to be more specific. And he married my great-grandmother. She was born in Panama, but her father was from Jamaica. He was a Maroon. Maroons were indigenous people of African descent that merged in with the indigenous people in the West Indies, and in the Jamaican context, they lived in the Blue Mountains, the deep Blue Mountains. So my great-grandmother's father was from that spot of the world, and he came to Panama, had my and my great-grandmother was born, and he was a really big student of Marcus Garvey. So he was very, very pro-Black, and have his daughter marry my great-grandfather as a white man caused a lot of controversy. Jeez. And of course, within this context, while I'm describing the people to you, imagine that they're all speaking Spanish. Imagine that they're all speaking Spanish, and then imagine how it is in the U.S. where people assume, well, all you talk about is Spanish. You need to know more languages, which means talk English, basically. Imagine that kind of backdrop. It was already a lot of stuff happening in Latin America for my family tree. But my great grandmother, my great grandfather got married. My grandma was born along with my other aunts, grandaunts and granduncles, and later my mother was born. And she came to the States at one point to go to pursue her education. She got involved with my biological father. My biological father, he has Afro-Native ancestry, and he also has Gullah Geechee, as I found out in his family line. But they got involved with one another, and as happens to many people, they start to lose track of God, and they end up getting too caught up in each other, and that was a result. And my mom did not know what to do with me while raising me, and also trying to finish her education. But she felt the Holy Spirit tell her, clear as day, Paula, if you give yourself and this child to me, I'll look after you, both of you guys, the rest of your days. And God has proven to do just what he said. So my mother dedicated me at an early age, at a Bethany Church in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Oh my God, I forget his last name. Whatever. Bethany Church in Baton Rouge, Louisiana is where I was dedicated. And later on, my mother went to medical school at East Carolina University. So we moved to Greenville, North Carolina, and lived there for 6-7 years. Then when she graduated from there, we moved to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where I lived with my grandparents and my great-grandparents in one household there by adolescence. So that was 3rd through 5th grade. Wow. Give you some context for those who are movie buffs out there. Movies that still speak to me are Land Before Time. Being a young single child with a mother with 2 other brachiosauruses, that were grandparents, that was my life. Every time I saw them, I was like, yeah, I relate to that.
Yeah.
That's real. And I love my childhood. I'm a child of the 80s and the 90s, late 80s to be specific, but I love my childhood. Amblin Entertainment, my guys. Every time they made a movie, it was dark. I was like, Five got lost in America. His family's in tears crying. Land Before Time, his mother dies after a brutal attack, and they're having to get all this racial tension out. Three horns don't talk with long necks. I remember seeing that clear as day, like, whoa. Did a child's movie just talk about racism between animal species? We were trained early on. I remember thinking back, like my childhood trained me early on to see these distinct differences. And I had to reconcile all that in my own self because I had a very diverse tree. And my grandparents always told me, you really don't have the freedom to hate on anyone because, you're a Heinz 57.
Wait, a Heinz 57?
That's what's the catch up? Is that Heinz 57?
I think.
Yeah. My grandmother always said, you're too diverse to hate people. You have no choice.
Okay.
All about your background,
Oh, man.
Yeah. So growing up with my great-grandparents and my grandparents, later on, my mother got married to my dad, my stepdad. And in 98, when she graduated from UT or University of Tennessee, and we moved to Georgia in 98, and we've been there ever since. But I say that to say that my family background was quite diverse. When people asked me how I identified, of course I said I was Black. It wasn't even a second thought. But I knew that there were so many varieties of Black experience. And for me, it was very specific to know specifically who I was because I was very distinct in my experience. It wasn't like many other experiences. And there were times I was mocked a lot in high school and middle school for that. People didn't believe that my great-grandfather was white. They didn't believe that my great-grandmother was Black and that they were in an interracial relationship. They didn't believe that.
Wow.
Really big deal to know early on that people should know where they come from and be proud of where they come from and the stories that are a part of where they come from. And that influenced me in my own work, when it comes to history. I have since learned that I have a photographic memory, and that's actually something that runs in our family. So, it's been interesting just to see how history is a big deal for me, in this era. Yeah. Because it helps people, for me, history is storytelling. History is not just about knowing facts and data. There is that aspect, historiography, and there's a science to it in many ways. But history is also about, uncovering how things come together, how things intertwine, understanding how we got to the areas to the eras that we are currently in and how we can go forward. And so history, for me, is a big way of resistance to evil. So much happens with racial terrorism because of stereotypes and mindsets that were promoted not when people were adults, but when people were kids.
Yes. That's so
I remember
good.
telling one of my friends about that issue. And Craig, let me know, am I still answering your question? I'm still on track?
Go ahead, Jalen. I think he had a question.
Oh, yeah. No, I was just gonna say, Brad, first that is an amazing story. Oh my gosh, that is amazing. Like that background is fire. What in the world? I was gonna ask what I was gonna ask you too. I was gonna ask you, man, like with your experience, man, because you have an incredibly diverse experience. So I know that with places that you moved, places that you had to go to school, different places, meet different type of people, all type of race. So what was it like? What was your experience like growing up dealing with race? To be a person who grew up, you said Louisiana, but then you said Tennessee, then you went to Georgia. These are all super diverse places. You know what I mean? So what was your experience like with that?
I'll be honest. It's one of the traumas of moving a lot is that you never really settled in. So there were lots of times it felt like, the best way I can say it felt like having tape. Not tape. What's the best way? It felt like putting tape on, trying to tape something on the wall and then trying to rip it off and the tape pulls the paper off. Having to move was traumatic a lot, and I don't blame anyone for that. It's just the nature of what happened because of living life as a single child with a single mom. To move from Greenville was a big deal because I had been there since since I was a kid. That was my family and friends. I'd grown up with storefront churches, The particular branch of the charismatic movement, by the way. I grew up in the charismatic movement, particularly in the faith movement, back in the day with people like Helen Baylor and the stories of people that were drastically freed, from addictions of so many kinds and seeing the power of God. That was real for us. People talking about miracles and the Lord providing in radical ways, just like he did with Elijah and Elisha and the widows and the families they worked with. My mom and I saw that at the time. Like I meant when I said that God looked out for us and those things were real and faith was not a small deal for us. It was a big deal. And I was glad to be in those churches. I went to a school called St. Gabriel's Catholic Elementary School because Mom did grow up Catholic in Panama and went to Catholic school. So I was the only Gabriel at this Catholic elementary school called St. Gabriel. So going to a charismatic church. But it was crazy, like seeing these nuns in the rural hood on the front line, white nuns, just to be more specific, these white nuns that loved me and loved all the kids that were there and were constantly on the ground. I saw what it was like to pray in the evangelical charismatic movement and see prayer in the Catholic world. To me, I just saw people that loved God. And so it was a big deal. Sister Act will always have a special place in my heart because I remember thinking, those nuns are nothing to play with. Those nuns are women of God. Those nuns are nothing to play with. And I say all that because that's part of the diverse experiences that I had. Leaving all that behind when I moved was a lot. Then getting to Tennessee, I saw white people when I was in North Carolina, but they were in my preschool days. I do remember at one point, it was very distinct. There were only 2 white kids in the preschool I was at, and these 2 white kids were constantly mean toward me. And I was always perplexed by that. I was like, why are they mean toward me? And I don't even know them like that. Since growing up and realizing how things were in the Carolinas, specifically in the Greenville side and many other spaces, now I'm like, now I think, okay, well, they probably taught some stuff at home. Most likely. I also in Carolina, it was interesting because, North Carolina, where I was a predominantly Black experience for me. Most of the church we went to were all Black. And so I didn't have any white friends or family. My mom at one point, our car broke down in the middle of the cotton fields. And remember the KKK were in those areas. They had marches in those areas. In those areas. So my mom was freaking out and she was in tears and God sent this family of country folks country folks, to, some say rednecks, and these guys fit the bill. Little girl was about 2 or 3 years older than me, and she's like, I had never seen a colored boy before. And the guy offered to fix my mom's car, and he was just a living miracle. And then after that, when they found out my mom was a single mom, we were able to get assistance from them for a long time. And so I ended up staying with these country folks with their daughter, eating Velveeta cheese and watching Who Framed Roger Rabbit. My mother was able to go to medical school and then have a space to stay and just rest when she was working a lot. And that was normal. It wasn't a shocker for me.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. Tennessee was radically different, because Tennessee, that's where I got exposed to predominantly white communities in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Oak Ridge, Tennessee is where the atomic bomb, by the way, was developed. So there was a lot of history in Oak Ridge, Tennessee that, we were taught at an early age. Oak Ridge does a lot of good stuff for education, quality education. And living with Oak Ridge, it was a shock for me to finally have white kids in 3rd grade that I had never encountered before. And as time went on, I knew what it was like to have best friends who were white, And it was interesting because with other, extended relatives and cousins that didn't grow up having that, it was interesting realizing that, I had to prepare myself to say, there's nothing wrong with having white friends. And no, I haven't forgotten my roots. And yes, I'm still Black. I'm still proud to be Black.
Yeah. Well, Gabe, man, we'd love to know, with your experiences growing up and parts of your childhood, you were in predominantly Black settings, and other parts of your story, you were growing up in predominantly white settings. And then you also had a faith that was built up, going to church with your family, going to a Christian school. So you have all of these just diverse, as we spoke about earlier, diverse experiences, and in relation to the world, to the church, and to who you are, your identity. With that in mind, man, our world, especially in the church setting, loves to talk about reconciliation. We see the issues in the world, we see the problems, the divides. But what is reconciliation? What is it really, and how do we get there?
Let me start by saying this: reconciliation. Later on, my mom and I, we end up going to when we moved to Georgia. We ended up going to a multiracial church called Liberty Church in Marietta, Georgia. And that was a radical experience for me, because it was there that, I'm thankful I was able to see, for the time I was there, reconciliation, being attempted, and people trying to live it out. My youth pastors that I grew up with were Jamaican. They were older Jamaican couples. The senior pastor was white. And at the time under Black bishop, African-American bishop known as Joseph Garlington. So it was a really big deal to see diversity and to see people at least trying to address your experiences. Now, coming out from that, I've since moved on, because there were things that I saw behind closed doors that were questionable to me, and that as time went on, made me realize that diversity is not what reconciliation is. Reconciliation, doesn't just mean we have a Black. Black. Some people in churches, they assume if we're reconciled, that means I'm Black and you're white. That's the two most common examples that tend to come up. But I'm Black and you're white, and therefore we should be able to be friends. That's reconciliation. That's not reconciliation. You can have friendship and be on good terms with people who are in different cultures, but that does not mean that you have an understanding of the things that impact you both. It just means you're friendly with each other. Reconciliation, more specifically, is where there has been a breach, and when the breach has caused damage culturally, systemically, you're able to come together and close that gap. So in reconciliation, when Black churches have been harmed by various aspects of white culture, using power, to get what they want, using power to steal land, using power to do gentrification, using power, to do voter suppression, using power to call the cops on people saying they look suspicious, and then having family members locked away for 20 plus years for crimes they didn't do. Reconciliation is getting involved and acknowledging what the issues were, and then finding ways to bridge that gap and close it.
Wow.
It's also within that conversation a word that I would be more, that I think needs to be said more, and that's restitution.
I like that. Restitution.
Right, in the Bible, like Naboth's vineyard, what happened with Ahab and Jezebel, remember that was not his vineyard, it was not his land that he worked. He wanted that vineyard from Naboth in the book of 1 Kings. Naboth wouldn't give it up, and Ahab went to his wife Jezebel, who then hired scoundrels to lie on an innocent man in the name of God, steal his vineyard, and then not even think a second thought. That was murder, that was theft, and it wasn't enough for Ahab, if he felt bad, to say, I'm sorry. No, restitution would have been, I'm giving the vineyard back and I'm paying price for it.
Exactly.
Oh, that's good.
Restitution, that's been something that is a part of the reconciliation process. When there has been lying, your apology should be as big as your sin was.
Wow.
So restitution is a part of that process of public confession. If I were to use a biblical case example, Zacchaeus, the tax collector, Luke 19, he took advantage of others and he said, I'm going to be doing restitution for all those that I did usury toward.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
That's reconciliation in the church, addressing the wrongs that were done when people had no power and power was used against them. Conciliation is also a term that we have to talk about as well, because conciliation is very strategic. I like people like Mark Charles, Navajo, man of God. Mark Charles noted how conciliation addressed the fact that this was not about two equal parties in American history. It was with Native Americans, for example. It wasn't as if white Americans and Native Americans were two equal parties coming together and they both have things to work on. The foundation was never equal since day one. When it came to the treaties being broken and the genocide and the claims that Native Americans were Canaanites to be eradicated from the land. These things are where conciliation is critical. Conciliation means that you address how we never had a right standard to begin with, and that we have to have a whole different foundation.
Wow.
And a lot of these conversations on reconciliation tend to, go toward, unfortunately, they go to the mindset that if we can just come together and you as a black man tell me you're sorry, and I as a white man say I'm sorry, we'll be friends. That's not reconciliation or conciliation.